Welcome to Get a Word In, a podcast about content marketing. I'm your host, Adam Walker. I'm passionate about sharing stories and knowledge through content, especially in the form of podcasting. In fact, I co-founded Edgewise.media, a podcast-first marketing content agency. On this show, I interview content marketers at some of the top companies in the world and discover what's working for them, what isn't, and most importantly, what's next. So stay tuned and get ready for some great content about content marketing. Joining me on the show today is Ross Briggs from G2. Ross, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Man, so listen, I'm going to start with this. I love G2. For the listeners, it's g2.com. And like, if you need to know kind of like the overview of software or like comparisons of software, like that's where to go. Like if you need to solve a problem, like it's the place to go to find the software that you need. It's fantastic. Ross did not ask me to say that. That's just my own spiel. But Ross, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, what your title is, what you do, what do your days look like, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, sure thing. So like you said, Ross Briggs, and have been at G2 for about 2 years. I'm the director of SEO and content. So we have a team of SEO strategists. We have some link builders in the team. And then we also have a small army of content marketers pumping out tons of content. We have 2,200 categories on our site, and we try to make content that kind of serves all those different categories and software types. And as you said, we are the place to go for software. If you have any type of software that you can imagine, I'm sure we have reviews on that. We actually just hit our 2 million review milestone. So that's been a pretty exciting thing for the company.
Listen, they got listen, I mean, I'm a fanboy, so I'm just going to fanboy for another minute, but they've got like reviews. They have like pros and cons. They have like estimated cost of like the different packages. Like it's legit. So it's and did you say, I just want to make sure you have 2,200 categories that you're creating content for?
2,200 categories. So basically every type of software that you can imagine. And then some that you probably can't even imagine or have never heard of.
Is there like, I got to ask that, is there like a really obscure category that like that you can think of off the top of your head that like would amaze me here? Is there some kind of random category at all?
Oh, sure. We've got we've got like CRM systems specifically for agricultural companies. So it goes as deep as something like that.
Wow. That's I love that. Okay. All right. Okay, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm using a CRM. Maybe I'll ask you. Maybe I'll look up what G2 says about that CRM when I'm done here. Maybe I'll put a review up there for it. So, because I like the CRM that I'm using. So, all right. Well, Ross, let's dive in and let's talk content marketing. I can't wait to hear your perspective on this. So let's start with what's working in content marketing right now.
Totally. Something that's working really well for G2 and something we're really leaning into this past year and this coming year is UGC content. G2 is in a lucky enough position to kind of be at the center of folks trying to sell software, people who are buying and researching software, and then, of course, the people who are coming to the site to review software. We also even have a fourth group now, which is software consultants and implementation specialists. So those are people who have done, hundreds of implementation jobs for different companies and have a really unique perspective. And each of these groups kind of has this incentive to connect with the other group. So the people who are making and selling software obviously want to connect with the buyers, want to get good reviews. The people who are purchasing software have really interesting questions to ask and perspectives. Obviously, the reviewers are the people who can provide that unbiased opinion and have used the software and can provide their perspective. And so what we really try to do, as we mentioned, we have 2,200 different categories. We have about 150,000 products on the site. And so the scale of content that we need to produce is massive. But even more than that, the level of expertise that we need to connect with people who are in these markets for the software and have built their entire career around this category of software and using that type of software. So connecting with those folks can be a pretty big challenge for even our large team of content marketers. And so we actually have and building out the skill set of not just creating content in-house and perfecting that, but also perfecting the ability to do outreach to people, to help them with editing their content, to help with suggesting topics for content. And we kind of provide and try and make these incentives work. So, hey, if you're a seller of software, you can come to the site and you can post an article and publish to our blog, but you can't be overly promotional with things. You can mention your company. You can talk about what the company's doing, but you can't just sit there and promote your product and say why it's the best. And so that's been a really great way for us to source really helpful in-depth content on these different categories, and to be able to produce it at the scale that's required to meet all those different buyers in all those different categories.
Man, I love that. I
Yeah.
mean, because it's like a win-win. Like user-generated content, like they're getting exposure, you're getting quality content, you're getting content that's ideally optimized for SEO. I mean, it's kind of a win across the board, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And with with reviewers, like those are usually people who are looking to build their career, establish like, notoriety within their vertical.
Yeah.
So for them, we try and do a lot of career building things and kind of celebrate the people who contribute most to the site. And so that's a win-win for them as well.
I mean, and I imagine you've got a pretty large user base that contribute to the site, right? I mean, we're in the I don't know, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, I assume.
Oh yeah, probably over the lifetime, we're probably approaching almost 1 million users who have come and contributed a different review. And we've got a huge database of people that we can reach out to and have said, hey, I've contributed a review, but feel free to reach out to me again if either a user has a question on my review, has a question on the software I reviewed, or if you have another similar product you think I might have used and you'd like a review on that one as well.
Love that. So let's dig, if I could, let's just dig in for just a second more about user-generated content. 'Cause I'm curious, like, is there, let's say there's somebody listening, a marketer listening, and they realize, oh, we have users that could generate content. They could write blog posts for us. We've never really thought about that. Like, what are some things they should be thinking about if they want to start going down that path?
Absolutely. You need to build the skill set, as I was mentioning, of the team to do sort of that editing work and that facilitation of content. Because oftentimes you have these people who are extremely experienced and know all the right answers to the questions, but they may not be, fantastic writers. They may not write all the time. They probably don't know how to SEO optimize their posts, things like that. So you need to build that muscle and that capacity on your team to not just write the content, but actually facilitate that content coming in from people. And then the really important thing there as well is you need to build that community. And you need to keep in contact with these people and provide things of value, which can oftentimes be content marketing assets, before you're then asking them to come back and perform some type of duty or contribute content for your site.
I mean, I like that you said you have to contribute things of value. Like that's where marketing has been going for so long. And I still feel like so much of marketing is hung up on like the me, look at me. Right. And like, no, marketing is about creating and contributing value to the people that you want to reach. That's all it's about. That's the whole deal, And so it's so good to hear you say that. I appreciate that.
100%.
All right. So now let's talk about what's not working. What are you shying away from? Is anything, maybe it was working a few years ago. Now it's not. Like, what are you thinking about?
Yeah. The thing that stands out to me is like thinking about building this community and keeping an audience coming to your site and serving content there for them. And I do love what you said there about, it's not all about the me type thing. And actually it is about contributing that value. And I think there's so many different places that people can go to contribute to consume content today. You don't have that captive audience that maybe, a decade ago you had a little bit more, where you could kind of put your message out there and you were paying for it to be there. And therefore you could basically say whatever you want in the commercial because there's no other channel to turn to on the TV.
That's right.
Today it's like, you can go to any channel that you want. And so you really need to mix that engaging content, informative content with a little bit of that promotional message. But you need to keep people engaged. And I think the thing that's not working for us is being overly reliant on one channel to send out our content. Our biggest channel, our biggest driver is SEO, and that's always going to be, I think, our bread and butter. And there's so much value in being able to capture those SEO keywords. But just like every other site, we had tons of algorithm updates from Google this past year. Many of those were specifically focused on product reviews. But you can kind of look at that like that's always going to happen, right? You're always going to run that risk if you become too concentrated in a single channel. So maybe TikTok's working really great, but now all of a sudden like this legislation comes along and TikTok's no longer allowed on devices, something like that, right?
Or you get randomly banned like people do on TikTok for absolutely no reason. Right. Like that could happen too,
Yep. Or maybe Twitter's working really well for you, and then someone comes and takes over the company and starts changing rules, and all of a sudden you can't reach your audience there. So the biggest thing for us is diversifying how we're putting content out there, keeping our eye on the big channels, but then also starting to grow that audience in other channels as well, and moving them from an earned or paid audience to an owned audience over time within that community.
Yeah, it's so important. And it reminds me too, and we've talked about it on the show before, but like with all of these channels, it's important to be there. Like it's important to be on TikTok, it's important to be on Instagram, it's important to be on YouTube, but they own your profile. Like they can take you down for anything. Like
right.
I mean, it was the craziest thing. Like it was 2 months ago. I was trying to get on YouTube to look something up and my YouTube account was completely banned. And I have never posted anything controversial of any kind, nothing even remotely copyrighted, like nothing. Somebody had done some weird complaint against one of my videos and they just took the whole thing down. And I was like, what? And so if you could spend, years building up a YouTube audience and one thing could take you down potentially. And so it's so important for us to your point, to diversify where we're at and how we're making an impact and how we're building an audience, because the chances are things are going to change in some capacity and hopefully not as dramatically as they did for me. So, but I did get the channel back, which was good. So I complained. I submitted a review. I didn't complain. I submitted a review and they were very kind and it worked out fine. So, but I'm still like, now I'm wary. I'm like, do I really want to build up that YouTube channel? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so, sometimes you suffer from success a little bit and you make too big of a splash and a competitor all of a sudden starts making those reports and I'm not going to read into it too much, but I've definitely heard things like that happening.
Oh, for sure. So it's crazy. All right. So next question, and actually very related to what you just said, what channels are working right now? Where are you seeing traction? Where are you seeing growth?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, SEO continues to be the bread and butter of G2. And that's so important when you kind of get into the value that we're able to bring to software sellers on our site. And it really goes back to the keyword intent and the purchase intent behind the keywords that we can hope to rank for. And it's really difficult to replicate that, especially when you do have 2,200 categories, you have 150,000 products. So trying to generate repeated and purchase intent traffic through some channel is very difficult. If you step outside of SEO, of course there's paid search channels, but when you're trying to build visibility for that many categories and that many products, quickly becomes a very expensive proposition. So we really do, things are working well for us in SEO. We did go through a couple algorithm updates this past year. We had to make some major adjustments in order to stay relevant and stay on top of the SERPs there. But luckily our hypothesis is held true and we were able to succeed, and we're actually doing better than we ever have before in SEO, which is amazing. The other one we're leaning big into now, as I mentioned, is moving people towards that owned audience. And so we're getting more and more into email and moving towards email is kind of in the vein of like the hustle or the daily carnage, where you mix some information with entertainment and try and build that owned line of communication to your audience to keep them coming back for more.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I do the same thing. Like I for years and years and years, I have a blog and I would like try to get people to read my blog. I want people to read my blog, and like nobody's going to read my blog. Like there's a million blogs out there. So what I started doing was I moved everything over to Substack, and I write a little blurb at the top of my blog, but then all below I write like, here's interesting articles from this week. Here's interesting stuff about leadership from this week. Here's interesting podcasts from this week. And like, so people read it, like get my newsletter really specifically for the links. They don't really care about my blog. They skip down that part, I assume. So, which is fine. Like I'm totally okay with that. Because I read a lot of interesting things, and I mean, a lot of people are very busy and don't have time for it. And to your point, like that is kind of the hustle. That's the daily, like all the morning brew. Like that's kind of, it's like infotainment. It's kind of great. So I love that you're doing that. And email lists, like email audiences. I mean, I just have to agree with you. It's so critically important for every organization that's serious about marketing to build up a solid email list. And it's been, it was kind of like a big deal, and then it wasn't, and now it's a big deal again. And I think that's great and really important. So it's fantastic. All right. So Ross, last question. And I think it's going to be next to impossible knowing the scale that you have to deal with, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So if you were forced to focus on just one thing related to content marketing for the next 12 months, what's the one thing you would press on to make the biggest impact for your organization?
The thing that occurs to me here is really sourcing true expertise on your topics. And that can take a lot of different forms. So it can take the form I was mentioning of sourcing that from your community, finding people who are the experts and getting that unique perspective that you can then deliver to your audience. It can also take the form of just leveling up your own expertise and making sure that you're truly speaking about like advanced level topics. And I think in thinking about, like the ChatGPT type technologies of the world that are going to be coming and are basically already here in many ways. The flood of mediocre content and similar content is upon us and arriving. And I think if you don't have that expert opinion and sort of that perspective that you can add to your content, I think you're quickly going to find yourself sort of behind the times and just like overwhelmed by the scale that AI content can generate similar types of perspectives that are really just kind of taking what's out there, indexing things, and then regurgitating them and sort of spun up into a different form of text, but ultimately saying the same thing that a million other articles out there say. So I think it's about building that expertise and then putting forward a unique kind of perspective on the topics you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I love, so I wrote down several things. The quote, "The flood of mediocre content is upon us." Like that is like the perfect t-shirt right there. So if I make the t-shirt, I'll send you one. But you're right, like it is. And it's interesting, it reminds me, I was just reading a book written by a friend of mine called Learning to Write. And he talks about how you're not really going to say something unique. Like almost nobody says something unique. What makes you unique in what you create and what you write is in your perspective or your take on what that is, how you present the facts, how you think about the angle that you use to think about these things is what's different. And so as content creators, like it's kind of the same thing. Like none of this is necessarily like earth-shattering information, but it's our take on it. It's how we think about it. It's how we take it and implement it in what we do on a daily basis that makes the difference. And so I think you're, and that's where AI is going to have trouble competing because AI doesn't have a perspective. It is the vanilla perspective. Right. And so we just have to not have a vanilla perspective and have, a Rocky Road perspective or something like that. So
absolutely.
I love that. All right. So Ross, if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'm going to recap our conversation from the notes that I've taken, and then I'm going to ask you for any final thoughts. Does that work for you?
Sounds good.
All right. For what's working in content marketing, you said user-generated content. You have users and experts that are able to publish your blog. They get exposure. They get acclaim in a sense, and you get amazing content that's good for SEO. And for how to start, you mentioned that the team has to be able to edit it. They have to be able to think about how to optimize it for SEO, and you have to be able to build a community to keep them in contact and continue to provide value to that community so they're not just providing value to you. So it's got to be a two-way street. For what's not working, you said you don't really have a captive audience like we've had in the past. So you can't just do whatever you want and self-promote like we used to because that doesn't work. So you need engaging and informative content with a message that integrates with your message. And being overly reliant on one channel isn't working, doesn't work, and is frankly kind of dangerous per my example for my fledgling YouTube channel. For what channel is working, you mentioned SEO is your bread and butter. You focus on keyword intent, purchase intent, and there were major adjustments to the algorithm recently that has played well in your favor because you have anticipated it, which is fantastic. And then owned audience, creating an email list that you can engage with is really, really important. And I fully agree. For what one thing would you focus on if you had to? It's sourcing true experts, which kind of goes back to the user-generated content, which is super smart, leveling up your own experience. And you noted that the flood of mediocre content is upon us due to AI. And I lament that you are correct. So did I miss anything? And is there anything you want to add or any final thoughts you have for us?
You nailed it. Yeah, everything was there. Final thoughts would just be, if you're interested in researching some software, come to G2, explore our categories, learn about some software you didn't even know existed. All of our tools, reviews are all free to access. So definitely will help you make an informed buying decision in the future next time you're considering a new piece of software.
Or just if you're a geek like me and you just like tools and software and you just want to go down the black rabbit hole of stuff, just go to g2.com and spend a whole afternoon. You can tell it's going to be great. There's nothing, you don't need to do anything else. Don't watch Netflix. Just go there, check out the software. It'll be great. What can go wrong?
G2 and chill.
I love it. All right, Ross. Well, this has been amazing. I'm definitely going to ask you to come back on the show again soon. Thanks so much for your time today, man.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Get a Word In, brought to you by Edgewise.media, a podcast-first marketing content agency. To learn more about Edgewise, visit www.edgewise.media. I'm your host, Adam Walker. To connect with me, check out my blog at adamjwalker.com. Thanks for listening, and make sure to subscribe now so you don't miss our next great conversation about content marketing.